So yesterday we learned Daf Nun Aleph, and we learned halachas of rot. So the first halacha we learned was that that's only if when the body rots, there's absolutely no contamination, meaning no tachrichim, no wood, no earth. So dafka if the body was rotting on a surface that's rock, which never rots. So that was the first rule we learned. Then we learned that it's only considered rekev if it's basar, gidin, and atzomos all rotting together, not just a piece of meat that rotted. That wouldn't qualify. Then we had the halacha of even if two mesim. Thank you so much, Mati. Even if two mesim were buried together, that's called contamination. And the word for contamination that the Gemara used was galgalin. Then the Gemara said halacha of hair that's cut for sure is galgalin. But there was a shaila that maybe even hair that's ha'imid legaleach, even if it's not cut off the mace, but it's time to get a haircut, even that might be foreign material. That would be galgalim. The Gemara ended up with a shaila. Rabbi Yirmiyah had a shaila. What about the dead skin that people have at the bottom of their feet? Is that considered contamination? Is that rot considered rot that's not eligible? Then the Gemara quantified or qualified that shaila is that's only if the only part that rotted was the feet. But if the whole body rotted and together with the body rotting, the feet rotted, that of course would be rot that is eligible for tumah. Yirmiyah wanted to know, what about a woman that's pregnant, Rahman al and she dies? So the fetus, is that foreign matter? Or now we say uber yerachimai? The Gemara wanted to know, if we're discussing an uber, let's discuss zera inside a woman. And I don't think I clarified it yesterday. The Mefarish is very clear that the shaila of zera b'mei imai is, do you say that since nothing was created with this zera, if it has not yet fertilized something, therefore it's zera, we would say it's bottled to her body? Or do you say it's still possible that this zera will fertilize something? I guess zera for a certain amount of time, I think for 3 days, it could still be active. So it still potentially could form a fetus, could form a baby, and then it's going to be considered foreign matter if you hold that uber b'meisha is foreign matter. And that's why the Mefarish said that this shaila is only relevant in a woman of childbearing age, because if she's of childbearing age, then it's possible that this zera will fertilize something. But if she can no longer have children, so then that fertilizer for sure would not ever have the potential to be attached to an egg, and then it could eventually be a blood. Rav Papa wanted to know, what about the fecal matter inside her intestines? Do we say that's since we need food to survive, that's the partially processed food, so it's considered part of her body, or maybe not? Then Rav Acha had a shaila. What about the skin? Then Rav Huna had a shaila. What about the phlegm and the saliva? So Shmuel Bar Acha said, if all of these things are considered foreign matter, so then it's virtually impossible to ever have a mace without these things. So rekev ends up being only something that we can discuss theoretically, but it's not anything that really would have any practical ramifications. It's an academic issue. Zok Gemara, no, it could be very easily to have it pure, because what if the guy took a nuclear laxative before he died, and after he died they cooked him in Mitzvah, which took the skin off, and then they smeared a hair remover. So it's common. I don't know what you're concerned that it's so unusual for that to happen. Right? That's what the Gemara ended up saying. Okay, gewaltig. Then we have Abaya who said that if a mace was ground, meaning it wasn't the body in its full form rotting, it was first ground, that would also not qualify. And that was the shaila, if you need kibur Yosy or not. The Gemara remained with the take. Then Ula Bachimna said, if it's not a complete mace, there's no din rekef. We also learned there's no din when you're mafana mace that you have to dig down all the soil underneath the mace and include a couple of inches of virgin soil. And also shchunas kvaris, meaning if there's 3 kfarim that are found within 4 to 8 amas of each other, now you have to start checking the whole neighborhood because this might be a basic forest. And Tosfos spoke out that shchunas kvaris, what's the difference if it's a full body or not? If you're choshed that there's a basic forest here, so just because one of the mason didn't have a complete body, is that a reason that wouldn't be a basic forest? So Tosfos says it must be that the concept of shchunas kvaris is a halacha l'Moshe Messina. It's not a logic, and therefore there's specific parameters under which the chiyuv of shchunas kvaris is. Okay, gewaltig. So the Gemara tried bringing a raya from a comparison that the Gemara asks between a mace and a chai, and the Gemara proves that it's not a raya. The Gemara deflects that raya. Then Rav had a different shaila. What happens if Rahman Latlan, part of the body rotted while a person was alive, but then the person died? Do you say it's rotted and it's from a dead body, or do you say no? The rot has to occur after the body dies. Once again, the Gemara tried to bring the raya, and the Gemara reflected the raya. Now we are up to another shaila that's not directly related to Rekev. It's a shaila in general about beria. We know there's a concept that a full beria is not bottle. That's really our problem that we have by Tailoim. Why is it that we don't say that sure there might be a bug mixed into my lettuce, but the bug is bottle b'roiv? The reason why the bug is not bottle b'roiv is because it's a beria. Something that's a beria has a chashivas. A, that it's not bottle b'roiv. B, is that even though it's less than a shear, it's a full beria. That's why if you have a complete grape, even if the grape is not the shear of what would require a bracha achrona, nevertheless, since it's a complete beria, you're mechuyev. So beria has a chashivas; it's a complete creation. And the shaila over here is what qualifies as beria and how does beria work? Boy Rabba, how does beria work? Namala, if you eat an ant, it's definitely less than a kazayas. Yet there's an isser to eat it because it's a beria. So what does it mean beria? Does it mean that an ant is a beria, but beria also has a minimum size? That's your ant. So what if you pulled the legs off an ant? The ant will still survive. It'll still be a living creature, and therefore it will still be a beria. But do you say since it's missing, even the beria could be missing a shear, and therefore you'd be putter from malchus if you eat it? Or do you say if it's alive, it's a beria, it has an independent chashivas, irrespective of its size, and therefore you'll be mechuyev malchus? So the mala shachas r'mau shiura gemir law, is beria also subject to a shear v'chaser, and now our ant is missing a leg or so? Or beria gemir law, or is it just a concept of beria? It's alive, so it doesn't have a leg, but it's a full beria. Therefore, va'ika, and someone would get malchus for it. So, to Gemara, let's discuss if we can bring a raya. Amar Rabbi Yehuda mi Diskarta, Rabbi Yehuda from the city of Diskarta suggested the following raya. Tashma, there's 2 psukim that the Torah uses to discuss shrotzim. And let's look at these 2 psukim. It says, Eila hatmeim lachem, b'chal Sheretz, kol anegeya bohem. If you touch them, b'moisam, when they die, yitma dar. So it says bohem, you have to touch them. Then it says regarding the shrotzim, mayhem, if from them fall, b'moisam yitma. So let's have a look at these 2 words and how they impact the halacha of what is considered a sheretz that's tummy. Bohem, you have to touch them. Yochel b'kulos, so I would have thought you got to touch the complete animal, the full beria. Talmud Leimer Mayhem. Talmud Leimer, it says Mayhem, you only have to touch part of them. Mayhem, if it says Mayhem, Yochel Niktzasan, I would thought, even if it's not a full beria, even if it's a part of a sheretz, you'd also be tummy. Talmud Leimer Bohem, you have to touch them, which is mashma, you have to touch the complete beria. So the question is it required that you touch only a complete sheretz, or can you even touch a part of a sheretz? Haketa. How do we make Bohem and Mayhem work together to teach us one thing? In other words, how does Bohem stop the Mayhem? Because we don't, Mayhem as an Mayhem, right? How does the Bohem stop the Mayhem? Haketzad, you have no idea how your smirk saved me, because I saw that someone helped what I was talking about. Okay, Talmud Leimer Bohem. Haketzad, ad sheyiga b'miktzoson shuka kulon. There, you don't have to touch the full sheretz, but there still is a shear. There's a minimum shear of what you do have to touch in order to become tamei if you touch the sheretz. What the sheretz is, I mean, but yes, what the sheretz is. The shear chachamim, the chacham said, right? You're not touching the whole thing. You're just touching the part that you come into contact with. Indeed, the shear chachamim, and the chacham told us what's the size. Biche adosha. The minimum size sheretz that you have to touch has to be the shear of a hadasha. Where do you get that shear? Shekena chaymet, the smallest sheretz, the smallest full-size sheretz that exists in the bria, tchilas briyasoi b'chadasha. So therefore, you have to have a bohem. You have to touch a full sheretz, but the smallest size sheretz that exists is kadasha. And therefore, any sheretz that's bigger than that, you only have to touch mayhem. You only have to touch a sheretz that's the size of an adasha. You see how the Gemara knows science. If the Gemara can say with certainty that they know what the smallest sheretz is when it's born, that shows that they had a very clear knowledge of this. Shema Mina. Okay, but they still have to know that. It's very nice days. At least they even knew what they were. Yeah. Shema Mina, Shi'ura Gemira law. So you see clearly that the smallest sheretz that they're saying, which defines the shear of which a sheretz has to be tamei, is the chaymet. But let's think about it, Zok Tosfos. I could technically take this chaymet, rip off its legs, and it'll still be alive. So if they're focusing on the beria, not on the minimum size, well then it shouldn't even be b'chadasha. It should be less than hadasha, because I could take the chaymet after it's born and pull off its legs, and now it'll even be less than hadasha. But from the fact that the Torah says it has to be the full size of the chaymet, vice the chayes, there's a shear to it. If you took an ant and you ripped off its legs, you would not be mechuyev in malchus. Rab Shmaya, Zakna Shmaya, you don't have a raya. Ki ba'inan shiura. When do we say we need a shear? It's because b'deloi have a chadasha. If it was not the size of a hadasha, loy metama, it wouldn't be tamei. You know why? The nafla b'neshama. The Torah is trying to give us a minimum shear. The minimum shear is the minimum sheretz as it is when it's created. Aval nafla b'neshama. Once something is created and it's alive, like an ant, then taking off of it won't take away from the same barrier. When we're trying to define what's the minimum shear, we define it by the smallest sheretz when it's created. That doesn't change barrier. That's just the Torah telling us what the minimum shear is. Barrier is a different concept. So barrier would be a barrier even if you pull its legs off. You wouldn't. We're just using that as a shear. We're just using, the Torah is trying to tell us what is the minimum size. The minimum size is the minimum size sheretz, which is a chaymet. A dasha is a small being, yeah. I guess we're talking about certain specific shrotzim that it didn't tell us. Yeah. Okay, gewaltig. Yeah, so the shaila was, can you bring a raya to the concept and how the concept of burial works from the fact that the Torah tells us that the shear is kechayvet. And Dr. Gemara, you don't have a raya, because once the Torah telling us what's the minimum size that a sheretz needs to be, but it's not really talking about the halacha of beria. The halacha of beria is a different halacha, and therefore it might not be subject to shiurim. Any beria might be considered a dover chashiv, so eating an ant without legs might still be considered an isser. Gewaltig. Hashedra b'hagolgoyles. This is a shaila we had right when we learned the Mishnah. Does it have to be a shedra with agolgoyles, or either a shedra by itself and a agolgoyles by itself? So a shedra is a spine, and the golgoilus is the skull. Ibailu, is it shedra vigolgoilus tanan? Oidilma oy shedra oy golgoilus. What does it have to be in order to create a tumas mace, b'magu b'masa, as well as ba'oy? Amar Rav Toshma, shidra shagired roiv il in shabbat. A shidra that you pulled off most of its vertebrae. Tahira, it's tahar. And I just want to look at Tosfos to see how Tosfos defines it. Tashma shedra shagarad roiv il ulan shabbat. Pir shiber roiv tzloy shabbat. You broke most of the vertebrae. That's going to be tahir. Targum shall slois il ulan. But slois are ribs, right?
Ribs.
Not vertebrae. I apologize. So if most of the ribs are broken, it will be tar. It's not considered. So it seems like the shedra that we're talking about here is a shedra with the rib cage. Ubekever, what if it's not standing by itself? It's in a kever. Then afilu mishuberes oy mifurekas tmeya. Then even if it's broken, it's tamei mipnei kever, because the kever combines them all. Zok to Gemara, taima mishum degirit. The whole problem with this shedra, as to why it won't become tamei, is only because the ribs are broken. What about the fact that there's no gulgoilas over here? Haloi girit tmeya. If you had a shedra that wasn't broken, then it would be tamei, even though there's no mention of a gulgoilas needing to be here. Shemami no, oy shedra, oy gulgoilas katani. Dr. Gemara, no, you don't have a raya. Haloi katani, hakamash malon. Really, it means you need both. But the shedra part is what we're talking about. Hakamash malon, the chigirat taira. We know for sure that if the shedra has salois broken, we know that's not going to be tamei. But whether or not you need a gulgoilas or not has nothing to do with it. This is discussing this is talking about the shedra part. That was the Gemara's Havamina. The Gemara's Maskana is no. Maybe you need both, but you need both, and we're discussing what is the requirement of the shedra. Else the Gogoyla will be tummy. That's right. That's why would it be a raya? The Gemara doesn't say. The Gemara has a havamina. The Gemara has a havamina that it seems from here that one alone is enough, because the whole problem that the Gemara discussed, why there's no tumah, is only because it's broken. It's not tumah because there's no gogolos here. So even if you have a complete shedder with the ribs, it's not tumah. The Gemara is discussing if the ribs are broken, if the ribs aren't broken. Forget the ribs. I don't have the gogolos here. So that was the Gemara's havamina. Zok the Gemara, no, maybe we're talking about the gogolos here as well, but we're discussing you still need a complete shedra together with the gogolos. So you don't have a raya either way. Why would you have a raya? Right. So maybe you don't have both. That's why you don't have a raya that you're speaking. You have both. You don't have a raya. Could be it's speaking with both. Could be speaking only with one because we have a shayla. What was halacha? Gevaltic. So Tosfos teaches us an interesting lesson from here. So let's see Tosfos. Ta'ira ba'alma amrinon. We have a rule. Kama chesarim b'shedra. How much does the shedra have to be missing? Below shetama. So Omar Shmuel b'perek el treifas v'chein l'treifa. And the same halacha would be l'treifa, meaning if it's considered chaser and it's not a full shedra to be metama, huadin in a live animal, it wouldn't make it a treifa. The gam kan nira l'Rabbeinu Yitzchak, the yesh lahashvais, Rabbi Yitzchak holds that we can compare the nishtaber roiv tzloiseh treifa from the Gemara here that tells us that whether or not a shedra is considered complete with roiv, its ribs broken, if that would make it incomplete l'gabituma, huadin, such an animal would be a treifa. Uchedamin v'perek elu treifas nishtabru b'roiv shnei tzadin treifa. But nekru, if the rib wasn't just broken, it was torn out of its root, then afilu b'roiv tzad echad would also be a treifa. So this teaches us some halachas of treifa that are halacha l'maisa today. We might not be dealing with tumah v'tahara today, but if you have a lot of ribs that are broken, that would render the behema treifa, and if there was a rib that was torn out of its root, that would be a treifa, even if it was only part of one side. Zog the Gemara weiter. So we're still looking for a clarification. If you need both the shedra and the goylus, or either one would create a tumah. The Gemara is going to bring us some total of, I believe, 4 rayas, and we've just dealt with raya number 1, which the Gemara deflected. Now we'll try another one. Tashma, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shisha Dvarim. There were 6 areas where Rabbi Kiva argued on the Chachamim. Rabbi Kiva Matame, V'Chachamim Matayrim, and eventually the Chazer boy Rabbi Kiva, and then Rabbi Kiva was Chazer and agreed to the Chachamim that it's Tahar. Umaisa, once upon a time, Sheheviu Kupa Malaya Atzomais Lebeis HaKnesses Shel Tarsim. They brought a box full of bones to the Beis HaKnesses of the Tarsim. The Tarsim, Tosfos tells us, were the merchants that dealt with copper. They were the coppersmiths. So in those days, they had bottom midrashim for each trade. And even in a big Medrash where there are multiple areas, there was like here in Daguda, we have the sports section, and we have the business section, and we have the politics section. So in those days, they also had each trade sat with their own trade. So the pshat that said is because it was made to help somebody. Let's say a new fellow moves into town, and he needs parnasa. He needs parnasa. So they asked him, "What do you do?" So he would say, "I'm a coppersmith." "Oh, you're a coppersmith? Go sit by the coppersmith's table. I'm sure you'll be able to drum up some business there. I'm sure you'll be able to find a job." That's one pshat they say. But they say another pshat if nobody gets along with his competition. So they knew if they sit all the people in the same business together, there'll be no talking by davening because no one's going to want to talk because their competition's there. So they did it as a way to stop people from talking by davening. That was before H3. That's right. After H3, the whole thing changed. That's right. The other thing is, okay, hanicha when it comes to the different trades. But what about the sports section? There it wouldn't help. Gavalti. Zog to Gemara. But where you sit in the Besmedrus counts. I said over, could be a lot of people, I told you already, the story about us, there was a Satmar of Besmedrus, and there were 2 Yungalites, Satmar Yungalite in the Besmedrus, that by davening, they were standing in the back and they were schmoozing. So the Rav, who was also a Satmar Yungaman, he walks to the back of the Besmedrus, and he says, "You're 2 Satmar Yungalite, and you're standing by a Koshel Amaravi." Everybody knows in Satmar you don't stand by a Koshel Amaravi, because the back well is the Koshel Amaravi. So they said, "Rav, look who's talking. Where do you sit the whole time? By the Mizrach. So you're denying with the Mizrachistin the whole day. So you don't tell us about the rules of Samar. If you could be by the Mizrachistin, we could be by the Koshel Amaravi." So Zok Gemara. So they brought a box full of bones to the Beis HaKnesses Shel Tarsim, v'nichua ba'avir, and they put it in a place where it would not be covered by an oil, because there was shiloh. The shiloh on it was, are these bones going to be metama? So they put it in the air so that it wouldn't be metame ba'oil, just in case it is tamei. V'nichnas Tudas Haroife, and the famous doctor Tudas Haroife came in, and all of the doctors came with him to analyze if these bones are bones that would be metame. V'amarun, they said, "Ein kan shedra mimeis echad." There is not a complete shedra of one mace, and therefore it's not going to be metama. So Zok to Gemara, they're only focused on if it's a complete shedra. Taima the leka shedra, the mechada. Ha'ika, but if there was oy shedra, oy golgolos, the mechada, if they had either a shedra or a golgolos, because the doctor could have said, forget if there's a shedra here. There's no golgolos. You need both. The fact that they're only making a dian on if this is the shedra of one person, and therefore it's a complete shedra, that alone is proof positive that you don't need both. So, a time of the shedra, the mechada, ha'ika ay shedra ay golgalos to mechada, nazir megalayach alei. The nazir would be megalayach. Shemamina ay shedra ay golgalos to him. Zokimar, no, that's not what happened over there. It's loy mibai kamar. Loy mibai shedra vigolgalos. The b'meis echad, Leka elafilu. What the doctors were saying is, avada, if there's no gulgoilos here, there's no tumah here. But here, you don't even have a shedra. Elafilu oy shedra meisechad oy gulgoilos u'machar leka. The doctor was saying, never mind that you don't have both. It's push it. You don't even have a shedra by itself. But not that lahalacha shedra alone would be able to be metam. So this is the second attempted raya that the Gemara deflected as well. But we have some important information that we have to learn from this shaila here. So let's glide into Tosfos for a minute. Zok Tosfos over here. Let's see where we are. Nichnas tudus harayfe b'chol harayfe ne'imai. V'amar einkan shadrim me'esechad. U'beperish m'shnaish matzasi. Da'ach isa b'sefri. That this is in the Sefri. Here we are over here. Ha'ika shedra oigol goyles. The mace, chada of one mace, Nazir megalayachala. Ushmamina oy shedra oigol goyles tanan. Dr. Meyer, B'dachi dilma le'mivay kamer le'mivay shedra oigol goyles t'meizachalacha tzarechiyid. Tosfos has a problem. Ma hoyu tzrichan l'haris l'roifen. What exactly? I'm sorry. Why do they need to show this to the doctors? If this shedra, the bones, the shedra bones, if they're all from one mace or if they seem to be from multiple maces. Obviously, it's a bag of bones. It's not a complete shedra. If it was a complete shedra, it's obvious that it's from one person. But they obviously just have a bag of broken bones, and they're going to reconstruct it to determine if all of these bones are from one skeleton. We said earlier, the afmi mesecha tahira, even from one mace, if the shedra is broken up, it's tar. So, does anybody remember where we saw such a thing? That a shedra that's broken up is tar? I couldn't find it. So I was scratching my head and I couldn't find it. That's my rekev. That's talking about rekev. Here we're talking about shedra and gogolos. So I didn't know where it said that. Right? Yeah, because it's not a complete shedra. But what if you have a complete shedra? I mean, for the fact that it's broken off means it's not complete, even though it's there. Okay. That is one of the items that is referred to. Okay, very good. So anyway, it's tar. Right now it's tar. It's broken up. We knew that there was a Nazir that was a mahil over these atzamais when they were complete. They got broken up. And now we want to know if these are from one person or not. So therefore, so we learned that if it's broken up, but it's in the kever is mitzarfin. That's what we saw. So he was mile over all these bones. Now we just want to know, are all these bones for one shedra? Because even if it's broken up in the kever, if it's not the full bones of the shedra, then it wouldn't be enough. So they gathered all those bones that were once in the kever, so the kever would be mitzar of them, and they showed it to the doctor to determine if these are all the bones of one spine. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. I believe this was our second attempt at our raya, right? This is the second attempt at the raya. Now we're going to have a third attempt at a raya. Tashma, miminyana. The Brisa told us that there's 6 items that Rabbi Kiva argued about that he was eventually murdered. Umahin shisha dvarim, Rabbi Kiva matama v'chacham matarim. The 6 items are al ever min hameis, shaba mishnei mesim, even if it came from 2 mesim. Val ever min achai, shaba mishnei bnei adam, or ever min achai, it came from 2 people. We'll deal with what these things are later, but that's 1 and 2. V'chatzi kava tzomai shaba mishnei mesim, which is 3. Val revius dam haba mishnayim, which is 4. Val etzem kisoyra shenechlak l'shayim is 5. V'yashedra v'agolgoyles. That's going to be 6 and 7. So from the fact that it calls it 6, it must be shedra and golgoyles are combined. Simple raya. So you have a raya that you need both. Zok the Gemara turning on Tamid Bey. V'sol kedaita oy shedra oy golgoyles hani shiva hamyud. We have a total of 7 rather than 6. Zok the Gemara, no, we're going to eliminate one of the items in the earlier part of this list. Maybe Kikatani Kol heicha de pligi olei rabim. You know which of the 6 are counted? Only the ones that when there was a machlokes, it was the Rabbanon arguing with Rabbi Akiva. But there's one case of this list that it's only a Yochid who argued with Rabbi Akiva. And that's, even though the Brisa listed it, that's not part of the count of the 6. Lafuke etzem kesayra. This machlokes that Rabbi Akiva was matama by etzem kesayra. And the Rabbanon argued, it's not the Rabbanon arguing on that particular instance. It's the Yochid who the Polagalei. The Tanya we learned, Etzem Kesar Shenechlak Lishnayim, and Etzem Kesar that was cut in half. Rabbi Kiva Metame, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Metaher. So it wasn't the Rabbim arguing on Rabbi Kiva, it was only Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So therefore, that item, even though the Brisa listed, is not one of the count of 6. So therefore, Shedra and Gugolos could be listed independently. Or we have another thought as to what's not considered part of the count. Kikatani Aver min Ames. It's Aver min Ames. That's one of the items in the count. But Aver min Achai loy katani. Aver min Achai is not one of the count. So that's the number that will delete from the 6, and therefore Shedrin Gugolos will be independent. Kikatani kalhecha de Nazir megaleach alahiloy lafuke etzem kesayra deloy. We're only talking about things that are going to create a tumas oil. Etzem kesayra we learned in the Mishnah is with tama b'magu b'masa, but it's not tama b'oil, so that's not part of the list. V'boyisema kikatani kalhecha de haderbe. We're only talking about items where Rabbi Akiva was chayzer, because it says at the beginning of the Mishnah, eventually Rabbi Akiva was chayzer to agree to the Rabbanim that it is going to be Torah. Lafuke revius dam the loy haderbe. Rabbi Akiva was never chayzer from his position that the revius dam will be tamei. The amalei Rabbi Lubakapara loy sishana revius dam bechazara. Don't say that Rabbi Akiva was chayzer from his position by the revius dam. Sharei Talmudai shall Rabbi Akiva b'yodai. Rabbi Akiva stuck to his guns and held of that shita till the end. And besides that, Hamikra Messiah, he actually has a pasuk to support his position. Rebbe told Bakapar that don't list off Revius Dam as one of the items that Rabbi Akiva was chayzer. I know Rabbi Akiva kept the shita there, and it says in the pasuk, "We'll call nafshois meis lo." We had this drasha before that nafshois is rabbim to mean if you have a revius dam that's combined from 2 mesim, it's also going to create a tum. So Rab Shimon was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, and he said the following comment referring to his Rebbe: Ad Yomov Hayumatamic. I know all of the days of Rabbi Akiva's life, he maintained that the revius dam from 2 mesim are tamei. What happened when my Rebbe got up to Olam Emes? That I can't tell you. That I can't tell you. So that is a little bit of an off-putting comment for a Talmud to say about his Rebbe. In his lifetime, he was choshev. When he died, I don't know what happened to my Rebbe when he got up there. So Zok to Gemara, Shimon Omer Adjam of Haymitama, and Shemeis boy Chazer by any day. Tana, after Shimon said that, like Shar Faloshin, he realized that it was inappropriate for him to say that about his Rebbe, and that hurt him so much that he fasted for the rest of his life. And Bivalti fasted, his teeth became black. Tana Hush Charushinov Mipnei Tani Yosy. Bivalti fasted for the rest of his life because he felt he spoke a little bit disrespectful against his Rebbe. It caused his teeth to go black. Yeah. Tashma. Tanya we learned. Beishamai Oimrim, Roiva Atzamois. So that was the third raya. I think this is going to be the last raya. Again, we have to kind of lose focus. Our question is, do you need a Shedra or El Gogoros? Will either one create Tumas oil, or you need them both together? Tanya we learned. Beishamai Oimrim, Roiva Atzamois, Mina Atzamim, Oy Mishnayim, Oy Mishloisha. You need what we would call Roiv Binyan. When we say a Roiv Atzamis, it has to be from the Roiv Binyan, from 1 or 2 big bones that would represent most of the body. So let's just quickly peek into Taisus. Tashema Tanya B'Shami Roiv Atzamis Min Atzamim. Mina Shnayim or Mina Gimel, Pirish Oimi Shnayim Oimi Shloisha Evarim, Yitama Roiv Atamis Boil. A Roiv of Atamis will be if it's from Roiv Binyan. Uvesilaimim Roiv Mina Gvia, which is Roiv Minyan. May Roiv Habinyan or may Roiv Haminyan. It'll either be from Roiv Binyan or from Roiv Minyan. And Tosfos gives us a little bit of insight. Shiramach Evarim Yesh Ba'adam. A person has 248 Evarim. Half of 248 is 124. The Kuv Chafei, so 125 is Roiv Minyan. It's most of 248. Vim Tavas Kov Chafei Atzomos. If you took 125 bones, the Kitze Ma'at Min Kol Echad Ve'echad, and you took a little piece of each of these bones, At Shamido Al Roiva, and when you combine all these little pieces of bone, these bone fragments, it adds up to a Roiva, Yitama Ba'oil, it would be Mitama Ba'oil. Rabbi Shua, Yocheloni Lasas Diver Beishamai v'Diver Beisil Kechad. We're not going to say they're arguing. We're going to say that Beishamai said Roiv Minyan, Beisil hold Roiv Minyan, but they're each talking about a different way for it to work. But they both agree. Shebeishamai Oimi Mishnayim Oimi Shloisha Oimi Shnei Shukayim v'Yerech Echad, either from two thighs and a Yerech and a hip, Oimi Shnei Riachayim v'Shoik Echad, v'Hoyel v'Roiv Binyanai Shal Adam. So we're talking about Roiv Binyanai Shal Adam is Migoiva. It's most of the person's body in its physical makeup, in its height. It doesn't make a difference. Even Roiv Minyan is also enough, even though it doesn't represent Roiv of the body. There's many little bones in the joints of the hands and the feet. Now, so Shammai Omer is a new thing, and that's what we're going to focus on to bring our raya from. But I just want to focus on something that Tosfos says about what a yerech is and what a shoik is. And he says, let's see what it says over here. Tosfos speaks about what the shoik is. Oh, here it is. Nimsa Roy Binyan Shalad Tanina B'Mesechas Aylos. The Kachashvinan Ramach. We did this already. This is what it is. Yeah, here it is. The Chashvinan Chasevarim V'Chash Milamata Lamaila. What are we talking from the bottom of the foot up, or we're talking about from the top of the body down? So he brings from the Mishnah Aylos the Chash Milamata Lamaila. Tosfos says we're starting from the floor going up. Parshas Haregel V'Chas of Shnayim B'Shoik Chamisha B'Arkuba V'Echad B'Yerech, which would indicate that the Yerech is above the Arkuba, which is above the Shoik. V'Chorim Mashma Misnisin doesn't Shoik Lamatim in Arkuba V'Yerech Lamayla. Where is this Nageya? It's actually Nageya in Hilchos Tznius, because I believe it's brought down somewhere that a woman's Yerech has to be covered, or her Shoik has to be covered. And the question is, if Shoik is below the Yerech, then she has to be covered all the way down to her ankle. If Shoik is above the Yerech, it changes that. So I don't remember the exact link, but it impacted halacha of how much a woman has to be covered, because I think it says the Shoik has to be covered, and the question is, where is the Shoik? Is that above the Yerech or below the Yerech? So that's why it was a little bit of Gila Maisa. I don't remember the details. Oh, for sure can't be a rib. Right, rib is. Okay, so now let's focus on the raya. So Beis Shammai said another thing. I don't know. That's not a polka. I know my polka is above my knee. The polka is a chicken. It's loaded here. I don't know, but we gotta finish. So we'll talk about it later. So either the shedra or the goylas. So you see right away. So you have a right, it's one or the other. Zok Gemara, Shiny Shammai, the Machmir. You can't bring me a right from Shammai, let's see the Losh Mabach. Shiny Shammai, the Machmir Tfei. Fact Gemara, okay, very good. But live Shoit Mina to the Rabbanon. Time of the Shammai, who also needs both, is the Machmir. How Rabbanon? Shammai said, that's a Mina Shedra, Oy Mina Golelos. But the Rabbanon would argue, and hold you need both. Harabanan, Adik Shedra, Vigol Golelos. So maybe we have a raya that you need both. So law, you don't even have a right to that. Atkan like pligi rabban lo shamai elu be'etzem echad the osi min hashedra umin hagolgolos. Yeah, when would he argue if you only have one bone? But if you have a full shedra or a full golgolas, afilu chadam, it's possible that even one of them would be enough to create the tumah. So after 4 attempts of bringing a raya, the Gemara did not succeed in bringing a raya, and we remain with the suffix: do you need both a shedra and a golgolas to create the tumas mace, ba'oil or not? It's a shaila. It's a shaila. We don't know. Boy, Rabbi Barchama, roiv atzamois. You need to have a roiv atzamois to make tumas mace. Mina shedra vigol goilas. My zok to Gemara. Kikatani chatzi kava atzamois. It says you need a chatzi kava atzamois in our Mishnah. Heicha deika mishareva. That's if there's other evorim there. Avo min shedra vigol goilas. The chamiri. Afilu roiv atzamois. So it says in our Mishnah, a half a kav of atzamois of roiv binyanai or roiv binyanai will create a tumah. What if it's only from the shedra and the golgolos, which are more chomer? Maybe there even a roiv atzamois would be enough. Oidil maloishna. So that's our new shaila. Our new shaila is if you have bones that are from the shedra and the golgolos, which has a higher intensity of tumah, maybe even a roiv would be enough. Amar Rav Tashma. Hashedra v'hagolgolos. It says in the Mishnah, Hashedra v'hagolgolos. B'yisol kadaitach roiv atzamois the osi min shedra v'golgolos chomer. If you're going to say that you don't even need a full shedra or a golgolos, it's enough just to have a roiv of bones from the shedra and the golgolos. Listening al roiv atzamois habaman hashedra. So the Mishnah should say a bigger chiddush. Not that a roiv, not that a shedra and a golgolos are matama. The Mishnah should have said, even if you have not a full shedra and the golgolos, rather you only have a roiv atzamois from the shedra and the golgolos, that would also be tamei. Zok to Gemara, that's not a kasha. Harava huda amar, Rava told us beferish, loy nitzracha ela l'shedra v'golgolos she'ein ben roiv atzamois. Avada, you'd be right that even a roiva of bones that come from the shedra or the golgolos would be matama. But the reason why the Mishnah listed off shedra and golgolos specifically is because even if they're small shedra and the small golgolos that they don't have a roiva, the shedra and the golgolos enough will be matama. Basar the Shama Rabbi Kiva. After he heard from Rabbi Kiva, in fact, that even a small one will be tummy. So we'll stop here and we will be mamshich be'ez Hashem tomorrow. Shkoyach. So what were you saying, Chaim, about the shoik?